Okay, so I think maybe we're going to get started. So we're going to start with a prayer. So if everyone could bow their heads, we will get started. Dear Lord, we're so thankful for this time that you've provided where we can talk about health. We just pray and ask God for the presence of your Holy Spirit, and I'm praying that you'll speak for me and that the message that you would like to go through is what will go through tonight. In Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen. Before we start, it's somebody's birthday today, I think. Yes? And you're 91? 91. And your anniversary as well, or no? You got married on your birthday? Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's an accomplishment. Okay. When's your wedding anniversary? Today is both your birthday and wedding anniversary. So you got married on your birthday? Wow. You never had to buy him a birthday gift because it was your anniversary. So I thought maybe we could start off by singing happy birthday. Would that be okay? To George, right? Yeah. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday and anniversary, dear George. Happy birthday to you. Woohoo! Does anyone know the happy anniversary song? Happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy, 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 happy anniversary, happy, 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 happy anniversary, dear, 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 dear. Happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary. Woo!
That's Willem Tell.
That was
Willem Tell.
William Tell.
Willem Tell.
Okay. So on that note, let's get started. Yes, we're learning about health tonight. So just a recap of the rest of the week. So this week, so far, we started on Monday. We kind of made that correlation between resilience and mental health. On Monday, we went through all the mental health or most common mental health classifications. We kind of segued into resilience, and we started talking a little bit about sleep, a little bit about exercise, and the correlation with resilience. And tonight, we're getting further into resilience and thinking. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about changes. And then Friday, we're talking about nutrition for better mental health, the relationship between nutrition and mental health. So Friday, the focus is on nutrition, particularly nutrition and how it affects mental health. This is one of the things that we said yesterday or the day before. Also, I wanted to wrap up today by talking about some of the natural treatments or natural therapies that are used for mental health that I mentioned on Monday, just because there are people who weren't here on Monday who came yesterday, so I thought I'd go through some of those. Just to make it clear, anything that I talk about in the presentation, I'm not actually recommending. I can't recommend anything outside of a patient visit when someone is my patient. But most of the things I talk about are actually based on studies, and I usually do present it that way. So one of the things that we were talking about before was just your thought process and how your thoughts affect resilience and mental health. The idea is this: your thinking and success are in your hands. Focus only on a few things at a time. So often when people go to a seminar, conference, symposium, they hear many things. They say, yeah, I'm going to do that and that and that and that. And they might do all of those things maybe for a day or two. But then slowly they let those things go. So one of the things we talked about last night was having a neuroassociative hook. And I gave the example of one of my patients who his hook was driving to work. He'd park the car, but now I asked him to park the car further away in the parking lot, and that way he would have to walk 10 minutes to the door and 10 minutes at the end of the work. So his neuroassociation now is exercise in the parking lot go together. And as he's driving, he's getting ready to exercise instead of I'm getting ready to ramp up to a stressful day of work. The example I gave with Dr. Rangan Chatterjee was a patient who would make coffee every morning. And so he put, while the coffee was brewing and exercise together, so while she was waiting for the coffee to brew, she would do squats and planks and lunges and then get her coffee. And because those two were associated in her mind, it became really easy to make that a habit. So I would recommend that everyone thinks a little bit about their daily schedule. And is there somewhere in your daily schedule where you can put something in? Exercise is a good one. And where something could be a cue for your exercise. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It could be a little bit of calisthenics, maybe some squats, some lunges. With the plank, you have to get down on the ground. But something easy that you could do every day. You need a cue. The same way we have cues to do good things, we also have cues to do bad things. So something like smoking or drinking. I've often heard when someone's trying to stop drinking, I mean, this might sound just like common sense. They're going out with their friends, going to the same place. They get to the bar and they decide, I'm not having a drink tonight. They're with all their friends who are drinking. You can imagine how that goes. And then they think, oh, maybe only one. And finding it hard to make that habit change. Probably because that cue, that neuroassociation is already there. The bar, the same bar they always go to, and drinking go together in their mind. So removing the cue, stop going to the bar with those friends, and then that would make making the habit change a lot better. So the same way we're using a cue to put in a habit, you remove cues to remove a habit. Does that make sense? And then going out for a smoke break. If you smoked and you're working and everyone goes for a break and they smoke and you decide to go and hang out with your friends but not smoke, just being in that environment, you're going to keep getting that craving. Like, I want to smoke, but I'm trying not to. And sometimes we put ourselves in a position where we think it's willpower, but it's more your brain's system already telling you, I've associated this smoke break with you smoking is going to be very hard. So removing old cues is a way of making it easier on yourself when you're putting new cues in. So your thinking and success is in your hands. You can make a decision. I want to focus after this week only on maybe 2 or 3 things, and that's it. But I would encourage that exercise is one of those things, because it keeps coming up again and again, helping to change mental health for resilience, etc. Weight loss, maintaining weight loss, exercise. So how can we become more resilient and make habit changes that help with your happiness? Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about changing our mental health or helping with mental health, shifting from depression and anxiety to more joy. How can we make changes that help with happiness, help with mood, and help with our life approach? That's what we're hoping to talk about tonight. It's a big goal. What we talked about yesterday was some resilience habits, resilience practices and habits. One of them that I mentioned was meditation or meditative prayer. The goal is to practice a technique that counters stress and also in turn lowers blood pressure, lowers heart rate, lowers breathing rate, lowers stress hormones. Things such as deep breathing exercises, walking in your garden, gratitude, meditation, and prayer are all effective for shifting the brain out of that stressed fight or flight state into a relaxed parasympathetic state, which is more of a rest, digest, chill state, you could say. Now, when it comes to the breathing, as I'd mentioned, You can breathe in a way that relaxes the nervous system, or you can breathe in a way that excites the nervous system. So I'm going to ask you like a test. When you're breathing in the way that relaxes the nervous system, is the inhalation shorter or longer than the exhalation? Excellent. Everybody passes. Please remember, sometimes when people are doing this breathing, they just think deep breathing. So they'll take a long breath in their nose, they take a long breath out of their mouth. That's not going to shift the nervous system into a parasympathetic state as much as if your breath in your nose is shorter, your breath out of your mouth is longer. Exhalation is always longer than inhalation. So maybe breathing in for a count of 4. We could do it right now. And then you'll be very relaxed for no falling asleep though. Let's do it together. So you're going to breathe in your nose and I'll count you up and then count down. Ready? Breathe in your nose for a count of 1, 2, 3, 4. And now out your mouth for a count of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and maybe 8. Yes, go ahead, Tim.
What's the idea of the nose and mouth?
It could be breathing in your nose and out of your nose, but people tend to be able to control the exhaling more when you're breathing out of your mouth, as opposed to breathing in your mouth and out of your mouth. Yeah, go ahead, Henry.
I mentioned before
Hot.
to stop breathing
Stop.
while you just inhaled.
What do you mean?
Hold your breath
Yes, yes.
and then
Okay. So there's something called box breathing, which actually is recommended for anxiety. You can use it for stress as well. There's actually an integrative medicine doctor who's quite famous. His name's Dr. Andrew Weil. Has anybody heard of him? Somewhat famous then, let's say. But he was a medical doctor who really supported the idea of integrative medicine. And I think he was a big proponent or a big part of the naturopathic medicine school in Arizona initially. Anyway, he uses box breathing with his patients. So the way box breathing goes is you inhale for a count of 4, then you hold it for 4. Then you exhale for a count of 7, and then you hold it for 4. So you inhale, hold, exhale for longer still, hold. And you could do that 3 or 4 times. And so it's called box breathing. And he found that just when he recommended that breathing to his patients with anxiety, so it's a little more powerful than just the longer exhalation for stress, which is also something that Dr. Andrew Huberman recommends from Stanford University, more of the longer exhalation. But when he used it for patients who actually had generalized anxiety disorder, he found that was very effective, box breathing. But still, the idea is the same, longer exhalation. And that's what shifts your nervous system into a parasympathetic state. If you were to do it the opposite, as I mentioned, where you have a longer inhalation, shorter exhalation, that's actually going to ramp you up. Maybe good to do before a football game or something like that. But it puts you in more of a stressed fight or flight state. So breathing exercises. Walking in the garden, there's something called grounding, walking barefoot, just that connection with the soil, apparently something about the electromagnetic field coming off the ground and into your body. I don't know that much about it, but there are studies on grounding. But people tend to feel better when they take their shoes off and they feel the earth under their feet, which is something you could do a lot here in Lillooet. We mentioned resilience practices. So today we're focusing a little more on thought. And then I will do a review on sleep and circadian rhythm, which we introduced yesterday. And then we're ending with more practical tools. Resilience habits. So is the glass half empty or the glass half full? Just to do a little bit of review as we segue into new information today. See the upside rather than the seeing the upside rather than the downside of a predicament. So turn the circumstances around so that you can see the positive aspect of it. For example, this was an example I gave. Your friend goes on a vacation, doesn't call you at all. You could be happy since it probably means they're having an awesome time. The downside, you could think, my friend doesn't care about me. They haven't contacted me at all. I'm left out. Maybe we're not good friends. I'm thinking about them every day. They're probably not even thinking about me. Same situation. One is seeing the negative aspect and one is seeing the positive aspect. This is called reframing, and it's the first way that's suggested here in terms of changing the way you see something. You reframe your predicament. So I actually, when I was thinking of today's presentation, and we mentioned this yesterday, I thought maybe I would open it up so it would be a little more interactive. Don't like nervous, but I thought I would ask people, is there a situation in your life, if you want to share it, where we could kind of practice a little bit right now, so it's not just like a lecture, but you get to put it in practice. A situation in your life right now that you could see negatively, but I'm going to ask you if you could see a silver lining in that situation or reframe the predicament. Or even a situation in the past where you thought it was one way and now you say, oh, you know what, I do see the silver lining, or I can look at that situation differently. Does anyone want to share or have one of those predicaments that you could possibly see a little differently? Is my exercise going to fall completely flat? Nobody can remember? So we need to do a presentation on memory enhancement. After the... Go ahead, Henry.
What I shared you today about my mother.
Okay, wow.
I
Yes.
was a suspect because of a murder of my mother.
Yes.
And I had a theory who I suspected to be the cause of it. And it was true.
Mm-hmm.
The robbers were arrested. And that was a positive thing for me too.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's, what was the silver lining in that situation?
Well, thought I had a solution.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. This is more like something that you felt was bad, and now when you look back at it, I mean, it didn't have to have a nice ending. But when you look back at it, you see, oh, maybe this did work in my favor somehow. But, I mean, you did find a good solution. Not that that's a very difficult situation. So maybe I'll give an example. When I was much younger, I don't know if I want this to be on the streaming, but when I was much younger, I went through a challenging period in a challenging relationship at about the age of somewhere between 18 and 21, and didn't really care that much about school anymore, so I dropped out of school, out of university. Hopefully this won't be put up on the live stream. Dropped out of university. However, when you drop out of university, you're supposed to tell the administration that you're officially dropping out. So that means that they take you out of the classes, you get some more money back. You're not expected to do any of the exams or the assignments anymore. But I decided that I was dropping out and I was just not going to go anymore. Meaning, I stopped attending classes, I didn't hand in any of the assignments, I didn't show up or attend any of the exams. And when you do that, if you're still officially in the class, basically, unless you had exceptional marks at the beginning of the year, basically you fail. So I ended up, but I was in such a depressed funk within this situation that was happening in my life. I really didn't care very much at the time. So I ended up failing some classes, which wasn't great. And if I'd had the peace of mind at the time, I would have officially dropped out. And if I would have officially dropped out, it wouldn't go on my transcripts that I'd failed all of these classes, which I did. There was one class that I passed because I personally called the professor, and that was a class where you had to hand in a final paper, and the final paper was, the name of the class was The Philosophy of Death. And since I was in such a dark, depressed mood, I thought doing a paper for this class, I can do that. So I did a paper that was on death, and I got an A. But he said, I'll have to drop you down by an entire grade because it's so late. Anyway, so I passed that class. Anyway, having said this, I failed. And then after having so many failures on my transcripts, I was kicked out of the program. And so I thought at the age of somewhere between 18 and 21, that was the worst thing that could do, that could happen, that I could have done. Now I'm kicked out of the program. I have all these fails on my transcripts. But eventually I did get back into the program. I did extra classes. I wrote a letter, and I was back in the program on academic probation. And so I got my university degree. And then when I applied to do my master's degree, they looked at my transcripts from my bachelor's degree and said, like, what happened here? Like, it looked like things were going well, and now you have all these E's and maybe even an F. I explained the situation. Okay, we're going to accept you on academic probation. So all my prerequisites to get into my master's program, first I had to do prerequisites, academic probation. If I didn't get straight A's, I wasn't getting in. So I get straight A's and then apply again for the master's. We're accepting you on academic probation. So it was like those transcripts haunted me for years and years and years. Anything I applied to, they would look back at the transcripts, and I was only accepted into all of these other programs, including prerequisites, even to get into another program. Academic probation, straight A's only. And I remember feeling so frustrated. It's like a decade later, what I did when I was maybe 19 or 20 years old was still haunting me 10 years later, still on academic probation. And I thought that was one of the worst mistakes I could have made at a very young age. And I wish that I had done it differently, but I couldn't erase it. And I couldn't erase those darn transcripts that were following me. Eventually, and it used to bother me, I'd get angry and feel bitter. And eventually one day, I was able to reframe that predicament, meaning I couldn't go back to being 21 years old or 20 and dropping out properly, or maybe not even dropping out at all and handling what was happening in my life differently. I couldn't change that. I couldn't erase the transcripts. But I was able to look back at that predicament and realize the silver lining in that predicament was I was pushed to become a straight A student no matter what. If I wanted to continue in any of these classes or to get a different degree, I had to get straight A's, basically. And I don't know if I would have studied as hard or cultivated the studying habits that I did if the pressure hadn't been there. So now I can say in some ways, thank you for the bad marks. Thank you, younger Nadine, for the bad marks. I mean, but it's more, I found the silver lining in the predicament instead of being angry about this thing that seemed to plague me for over a decade. Now, if about 8 years ago or less, I had just seen the silver lining earlier, I wouldn't have spent so many years being angry about it. But eventually I was able to see the silver lining and do this, which is called reframing. So that's an example. Go ahead, Glenn.
I have an example. A long time
Oh,
ago,
do you want to use the mic?
critics
Yes. Okay. Right.
Many years ago, I had a girlfriend, and we had a bunch of apricots to can.
Okay.
And we both felt that we knew how to can apricots.
Mm.
And we started immediately arguing about canning apricots.
Okay.
And it got pretty vicious. I mean, we were really upset. And then I was able to reframe it. And the phrase actually was, our relationship's more important than the apricots. And so I decided, you tell me what to do, and I'll do it.
Yes.
That was a reframe of the original situation.
Okay. You saw it from a different point of view. Yeah. Does anyone else have an example? Maybe of something that happened in the past, and looking back at it now, you can see a silver lining there? No? Terrence? You also have failures on your transcripts? Are you going to share? Okay. Oh, maybe you can use the mic.
I'm rather big on principle, I guess, and I had a job a while back that, you know, the leader of the owner of the building was rather pushy and threw a guilt trip on everyone about taking their breaks, et cetera, and you know, no one was taking breaks, and you could see it getting into all of the staff, and a couple times I mentioned it, and you know, I mean, it was bad because I went rather feral.
Feral. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I can't repeat what I said because you know that just
Because we're in a church right now?
Yes, it's rather
Okay.
inappropriate, but I mean, the message was heard loud and clear. I mean, needless to say, I'm not at that job anymore.
Yes.
But the friends and the credibility that I made with the fellow employees of taking the sword for a principle was well worthwhile, and I mean, everything turned out for the better in the end. But yeah.
Okay. Right. So at the time, a difficult situation. But in the end, and when you look back, you see some good came out of it. So one of the things that we had mentioned when it comes to mental health, especially depression, some of the causes of depression, which I talked about on day one of the causes of depression is like past trauma, past difficulties, experiences of the past that are still hanging around there and not addressed, or people aren't sure how to address them. Reframing is often a tool that's used in counseling to help with past trauma. Not saying that what occurred is right, but then asking, can you see it? Can you see what occurred in a different way? And once you see what occurred, or you can in a different way, it's like the first step towards being freed from whatever that thing was. So you can't actually change the event, but you can change how you feel about the event, which is the basic principle of reframing. And when you change how you feel about the event, then you're kind of like the burden is alleviated. Does that make sense? So that's one of the basic principles for resilience, being able to reframe a situation. Something else that we mentioned yesterday, a resilience practice. And before I introduce new ones, I just want to go through what we talked about yesterday. It's thinking of a positive outcome and not a negative outcome. You can even bring in some visualization. So this is something that's coming up, and something challenging that's coming up. For example, think of an upcoming situation. Visualize the positive qualities you want to bring to it. So before that difficult situation occurs, you already know that you're bringing positive in and you can see a possible positive outcome. As Dora would say here, oh boy, this is going to be good. I can tell. So someone might be going in that situation saying, this is going to be bad, which is we're about to meet a shark and it's going to eat us. Or somehow this is going to be good. So our attitude and what we bring into situations makes a big difference as well. So the reframing is about the past. Positive outcome is about the present and the future. Resilience practices and habits. This is by Laura Malloy, the Successful Aging Program Director at the Harvard-affiliated Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine. She focuses on cultivating positive thinking. In this article, she says that they have people focus on 3 things that are going well in their lives, or 3 things they're grateful for each day, and then you bring that positive view into your day, into the circumstance. You could be in the middle of a difficult circumstance, and then you take an opportunity or a moment to think of 3 things that are going well in your life. And most people can think of at least 3 things that are going well in their lives. Maybe. But often when you're feeling very negative or depressed or blue, you don't want to think of those things. So the idea is that you're interrupting that thought pattern and bringing in something positive. 3 things you're grateful for, or 3 things that are going well in your life. I think we've got about 15 minutes before dinner. 3 things you're grateful for each day. This was something that I talked about on day number 1. Writing down 3 things you're grateful for, describing 1 positive experience that you journal about at the end of the day, and then sending a thank you. Even if you do 1 of those things consistently, that could be enough to just change your life attitude. Writing down 3 things you're grateful for each day, describing or writing about 1 positive experience, and sending a thank you. And I'd explain the reason why the positive experience, writing about a positive experience. And hopefully this is everybody's positive experience for the day. And if it's not, maybe it will be. When you're writing about that positive experience every single day, you're helping in some ways to change your brain. Because there's an area in the brain called the RAS, the Reticular Activation System. That area in the brain is in charge of focus and filtration. So there are many different things that are happening right now, but my brain right now is focused on you guys. And maybe your brain is focused on me. And you're not aware of the sound of the feet of the people in the kitchen, or the clinking of it's probably forks, or what's happening on the road here with the cars driving by, or the feeling of your feet in your shoes right now, or how warm you feel, etc. I could go on and on about all of the senses and perceptions that our brain is filtering out at the moment. So that system filters out things that are not important and brings your attention to things that are important, the reticular activation system. So when you start writing about 1 positive experience, and you keep doing that, you're training your brain now to start focusing on and looking for the positive experience every day. It's going to tune out other things and be like, oh, this is a positive experience. And after a while, that just kind of becomes like your attitude. You experience a positive experience every day because your RAS is already trained to look for it. Does that make sense? I gave the example of my awesome tangerine orange car, which I thought was so unique because I'd never really seen cars that were that bright and that orange. And after I bought that car, everywhere, even now, everywhere I go, I see tangerine orange cars. Before, I thought nobody has this color car. But it kind of came into the light of my RAS. And okay, orange cars are important to you now. And now I see orange cars everywhere. So that's the part of our brain that helps us when it comes to more positivity. But you have to train it a little bit. So the activity would be write about 1 positive experience, maybe in your journal, at the end of every day. And you could actually solidify that by kind of hooking it onto a cue, making it maybe part of your bedtime routine. the more consistent you are, then the easier it will be, and then it becomes a habit. And your brain will automatically look for those positive things. Other habits, this is according to the American Psychological Association. Avoid seeing crises as insurmountable problems. So as soon as you think, this is impossible, like I can't see out of this situation, it seems like you can't. You can't see solutions, etc. And then you could spiral into more of a doom sort of sentiment, and then things tend to go bad. But if you're avoiding seeing crises, according to the American Psychological Association, as insurmountable, then things in your mind open up to different possibilities. You can't change the fact that highly stressful events happen in our lives, but you can change how you interpret those events, how you respond to these events. Try looking beyond the present to how future circumstances might be a little bit better. Or I'd also given the example of Bob Proctor, who would write down whatever the problem was on a piece of paper, sit and stare at the problem, think about it, get up, move to a different chair, sit and stare at the piece of paper, get up, move to a different chair, sit. So he's trying to see it from a different perspective. Is there anything that I can do in this situation, or any good outcome that could come out of this? So shifting your thinking a little bit so it doesn't seem insurmountable. Accept that change is a part of living. This is just seems factual, but a tough one, because when things happen in our lives that weren't what we were asking for, it's difficult to accept the change. Again, according to the American Psychological Association, accepting circumstances that cannot be changed can help you to focus on circumstances that you can alter. The one thing that we can change is how we view the circumstances, even if we can't change them ourselves. Move towards your goal. And these are all practices for resilience. Develop some realistic goals. Do something regularly, even if it seems like a small accomplishment. That might be writing about your positive experience, doing it regularly. Then that enables you to move towards your goals. Instead of focusing on tasks that seem unachievable, ask yourself, what's one thing I know I can accomplish today that helps me move in the direction I want to go? I remember listening to a podcast with a Canadian psychologist, and he said that when he was working with younger people between the ages of 18 and 25 with depression, he would use this kind of principle. What's one thing that you think you can do this week? And he would give them an assignment. The assignment this week is every day to make your bed. And they'd be like, how is that going to help me get out of depression and how I'm feeling right now? And, I lost my job, et cetera, et cetera. Forget all of that. We just want to do one small thing this week. Make your bed every day this week. And when they would come back at the end of the week, they had a sense of accomplishment. Okay, I did it. And then he worked from there. Okay, now this week we're going to focus on something else. I mean, cleaning the room was a big deal for him with these younger people. Now we're going to focus on cleaning your room and keeping it clean for a week. Things that were in their control. And then to bigger things, and then working up to reframing. Now, can you see the situation you're in your life differently now that you have that sense of accomplishment? So one small thing that is achievable. Finally, from the American Psychological Association, take decisive actions. Act on adverse situations as much as you can. Take decisive actions rather than detaching completely from problems and stresses and wishing they would just go away. I mean, there is a certain level of stress reduction that I think everybody looks for, especially in stressful situations. Like maybe I'm just going to watch a movie for a little while. If that's de-stressing, maybe you take some of those other practices, going for a walk in the garden, bring your stress levels down, but then you take a step, something that is maybe even having a small impact on that situation, if you can. Go ahead, Glenn.
There was a famous hypnotherapist named Erickson, and he had a client come to him at one point, a woman that wanted, she said, I'm going to kill myself. And he knew that just saying, no, 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 don't, would not stop the thing. He said, okay, I think that's reasonable. You're really depressed. You're in a bad state, but don't do it with your hair looking like that. Like, get your hair done and get yourself a new dress. I mean, basically dress appropriately. And
Yeah.
so she took him seriously. She saw that he wasn't trying to stop her from killing herself. And so she did these things. And of course, at the end of the week when she came back, she felt a lot better because she looked a lot better. And she didn't kill herself.
Right.
That's
Amen.
the power of reframing.
Reframing, just accomplishing one small thing. Well, with this psychologist I was listening to, and that situation with that young person, they were suicidal. And he said, okay, just make your bed every day this week. And they were like, that's going to help everything. Like, I'm extremely depressed. And okay, I understand that you're depressed. And so, but just focus on this and just make your bed every day this week. And since he trusted him, he did. And then he felt a little bit better. So it was step by step, something like that. Yes, go ahead, George.
I used to be a logger at one time and driving cat and doing skidding work. And the stumps in those years were cut quite high, so you'd hang up on the stumps. And
Okay.
of course, I'd turn the air blue when this happened.
It
I
turned.
gathered up every limb, rock, whatever I could. I got my cat off the stump. I didn't go 20 feet. I was so mad I wasn't paying attention. I got hooked up on another stump. So anyway, I got the cat down to the landing, and I said to the boss, Paul, I quit. I've had enough of this. I'm done. What's the problem, George? He said. So I told him what the problem was. He said, well, where were you when I hired you? Where was my cat? Well,
Sorry,
I said it was
when you
in the
say
landing.
cat, you mean
The bulldozer that I was using to skid logs.
Okay.
He said, where
Initially, I
was my
thought
cat when I hired you?
a cat?
I
Yes,
said,
go on.
in the landing. Well, he said, go get it, he said, and get it down here to the landing, he said. Okay, I went back up, I got a power saw, I cut the stump off, got the cat on the landing. Paul kind of smiled at me, he said, well, are you going to quit? I said, why would I quit? The cat's off the stump.
Okay. So you took some decisive action,
Exactly.
even though that wasn't your plan.
And common sense on the way of the boss.
Common sense on the way to the boss. Are we starting? Yes. Okay. So before I get into some other studies, I think we are going to take a moment to get some dinner. Does anyone want to share anything else as the dinner's coming out? Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I have done a lot of his free virtual. Every year he does a 3 or 4 day free virtual event, which I've done every January. And I love that he focuses on the story and like the narration. So changing the story that you're telling yourself. So part of my story about failing could have been I'm a failure and I failed those classes. I'm never going to be able to accomplish getting another degree, blah, blah, blah. But I have participated in some of his programs where people share the story and then he'll say, okay, how can you change that story? And then they actually change the story on the spot. So that's reframing, yeah. I like that because it shows that the stories that we tell ourselves are kind of like the lives that we live to a certain degree. And when you change your story long enough, you change your life. Yeah. You're like, what does that mean? Yeah. I think we're going to say a prayer over the food. So let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you so much for just providing this meal for us. Thank you for the hands that have provided it. We just pray and ask God that it'll be blessed and that'll be good for us. And we say these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Awesome. It looks really interesting. Okay. I can see this is kind of small, but somehow I thought it was going to turn out to be really big and easy to read, which it isn't. I'll wait a few minutes and then we'll continue.
Thank you.
I am.
Did you go to cart? No?
I mean, yesterday I stopped for a little while. So I take a little bit of a break, but I'll begin again before everyone's finished. You don't know when you're going to finish. This could be the next 2 hours. Yeah, I'm going to get into some heavy concepts too.
Oh, okay, though.
No perfect bodies. One person was close. It wasn't. One person I think was needed to lose 0.9 pounds of fat, and everything else was perfect.
Want a little bit of this?
But
I did.
nobody has top that, including myself. What was that? You what? Oh, since 10 a.m. Okay, awesome. Good.
George and Karen, did you
Right.
already put all your beautiful stories in the book?
Somebody's gonna stop.
Seriously? Seriously?
No, you're like, you don't know.
Did you?
No.
No.
No time. Oh, look at that. Oh, thank you.
The way you tell them.
Peppermint, you do it, do the embody it.
No, no, I can eat everything. just grab it?
No, you can eat that at 6. To see if it's a perfect
But the trouble
in-body
is, Selena, I
assessment.
would probably embarrass quite a few people if I wrote a book and told the truth.
Well, you could say at the end, some names were
We'll see.
altered, changed. I mean, again, it's true. I'm kind of hungry. It's not bad. Nice. You want two, Henry?
Thank you.
Wonder what's for dessert. I wonder if there's going to be dessert. I don't think there's been dessert. There is dessert? Oh, the fruit's dessert. Okay, got it. Cool.
Years, right?
71 years.
What kind of anniversary? 70 years of marriage?
Yes.
71.
Wow. George's happy birthday. Today? Did you already sing? Did you sing already? Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness, my goodness.
I'm not quite
Getting up there. Wow. Wow, that's hard to think about. George, what do you think about the world?
No politics.
No, not the politics. The whole world as it is with technology that, when you were a little boy, you rode horses, I guess, right? Or cars already were, I don't remember. Like when
I was born and raised on a farm,
so you had tractors?
and when you're a kid on a farm, you're assigned chores from the time you're 6 years old. You do your share. You collect the eggs, you feed the chickens, bring in firewood, whatever it took. That's the way kids used to be raised.
Yeah.
And by the time they got to be teenagers, they were mature people. Our problem
waiting for
today
you
is the kids don't have many chores to do. And like one woman
Actually,
said,
maybe I'll go
they have
to the
no
bathroom.
foundation in their life. And that's a real profound statement.
Yeah.
When you think of it, these kids have no foundation in their life. Yep.
I lived at the time I grew up when there was war. You really had to look after yourself too.
That's right. And the fact is, you were taught to do things right.
Yeah.
And making mistakes was not considered a crime. If you made a mistake, as long as you learn from that mistake, that's a learning process. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, when they make a mistake, they think it's the end of the world.
See, now we have to learn how to reframe it.
But
Sorry, mistake.
What's that?
All I do now. You gotta reframe it. Like George said, it was common sense. You make a mistake, you learn from it, that's it, you move on. Now we have to learn how to reframe our mistakes.
as long as when you did it, I thank you. As long as when you did it, you didn't make the same mistake twice.
And if you made a mistake doing something, you got to do it over again, only this time right. So good. Wow.
Well, folks, I don't know who sent me this birthday card, but they must have known I was a cowboy. Thank you.
Can I see it? Oh, yeah. The Prince of the Better Living Center.
Very nice.
Okay, I think everyone is well into their meal. So we're going to continue on. I was talking the other day about some studies that have been done on children. And I referred to a study that was done by a psychologist named Dr. Emmy Werner, which I'm going to talk about. But before that, I wanted to talk about a study on twin babies called the Minnesota study. And in this study, the goal was to figure out, are people just genetically programmed, some people genetically programmed to be happier than other people? So when we're talking about mental health, part of mental health is the discussion of happiness and joy versus depression and anxiety. And so in this study, they wanted to see what portion of genetics, or how much do genetics affect our overall happiness and how we approach life. This study, it reported levels of happiness in 1,300 sets of identical and fraternal twins. And when it comes to a study, the more people involved in the study and the longer the study, then the more credible this study is. If the study is only done for 5 days with 4 people, not a lot of credibility there. If it's done with 1,000 people over decades, a lot of credibility. So in this study, it was 1,300 sets of identical and fraternal twins. Identical twins reported similar levels of happiness. Fraternal twins exhibited greater variation in their reported sense of well-being, just showing that there was a genetic correlation with the happiness. And some of these twins actually weren't even raised in the same environment. So when it comes to nature versus nurture, their nurture or their environments were different. Some of the twins were raised in 2 different environments and yet similar levels of happiness. The study was established in 1983. Tests were conducted via mail. Twins born in Minnesota from 1936 to 1956, and then they added other twins born between 1961 and 1964. So what did they discover? This is the general idea. 50% of happiness is determined by your genes. So I'd referred to this study the other day, but this is the actual study. Half of your happiness is determined by your genes. Notice I said only half. So maybe there are some people who just naturally have a proclivity towards being happier, regardless of the circumstance, only 50%. They also discovered that 10% of your happiness is determined by the circumstances in which you live. I find this last part here, or this second part, 10% is determined by the circumstances in which you live. 10% seems pretty small, don't you think? Mm-hmm. So people often feel like, oh, I'd be happier if I lived somewhere else. And then they move to somewhere else, but they find they're not happier. And so they feel like I need to move to somewhere else. And they're not happier, always searching for the best place to live. Not saying that environmental circumstances don't make a difference, but perhaps not as much of a difference as people think. 50% of happiness, your genes, 10% is circumstances in which you live, according to this study. 40% is determined by your actions, by your attitude, by your optimism, and the way that you handle situations. So that leaves 50% by your genes, 50% outside of your genes, 10% by your circumstances, and 40% is basically within your locus of control, meaning 40% is based on you. How do you see that situation? What are you doing about that situation? Are you going into the situation positively, optimistically? Do you have a positive attitude? Are you looking for a positive outlook, as we've just mentioned? How are you going to handle it? And that is really encouraging, I think, good news, just especially once you learn some of these tools and techniques when it comes to resilience, reframing, etc., to realize a lot of your happiness is within your own control. 50%. So in this study by Dr. Emmy Werner, she wanted to look at children and children in difficult circumstances, and which children tended to do well in difficult circumstances and which children didn't. For some reason in the 1970s, okay, this study here started in via male twins born from 1936 to 1956. For some reason in the 1970s, there was a burst of studies and more of an interest in children, and when children are growing up in certain ways, what kind of adults are those children going to be? And so it went a little bit like this. In 1970, there was the investigation of normal children that were exposed to significant adversity. And I'll get into what types of adversity. And then a part of the studies were identifying the characteristics or the factors about resilience. And then 1990s, more investigation into understanding the process that resilience and the effort and process of resilience in terms of adapting to adversities. And then we got more into a little bit of neuroscience, neuroendocrine substances. Whoops. I could see this as a stressful situation, but I'm choosing not to. Neuroendocrine substances about stress resilience are gradually explored. So looking more into things that you can take to help with that. In 2007, it won't tip, but thanks. 2007, you know what I could do actually? I could raise this up though. But this is what I did yesterday.
Hold on though. This is what I do when I'm here. And then it's flat.
Oh, neat. Okay. 2007, thank you. Ta-da! See, there's always an answer. Molecular, thank you, Thyra, and thank you, Pastor Derek. Molecular adaptations underlying susceptibility and resistance to social defeat in brain reward regions. And then 2017, getting further and further into neuroscience, which is really a hot topic now, and how our thinking affects how resilient we are. 2017, more investigation in interventions for resilience and neural circuits and neuropharmacology methods to improve resilience performances, such as pharmaceuticals affecting resilience. But it started off with just studying how we think and the effects of our thinking on resilience. And so in this study, and I'm just going to take a second to raise this up, so this is perfect, but I realize it's low. Okay. This is where it was yesterday. That's good. I didn't realize 1 hour into it, like, oh. Okay, so much better. Okay, so one of those psychologists, her name was Emmy Werner, and let's find her slide. Dr. Emmy Werner, actually I don't need this now. Developmental psychologist named Emmy Werner conducted a 32-year-long study that focused on children, following nearly 700 children in Hawaii, and she started this study studying these children from birth. She looked at all types of stress that the children could experience, including maternal stress during pregnancy. So she's even looking back to what kind of positions and states were the parents, was the mother in before the mother gave birth, poverty, family problems, as well as other stressors. 1/3 of the children she determined were at risk, meaning they were coming from unstable backgrounds. And in the actual study, unstable backgrounds meant an alcoholic parent, emotional abuse, physical abuse, a parent who used drugs, a single parent family, etc. So they were considered to be at risk. And what did she find? She found that 1/3 of these children, out of all the children that she studied, 1/3 within the 1/3, became very successful after 32 years of studying. Somehow they just were naturally resilient. And despite the circumstances that they were living in, they tended to succeed in many or all areas of their lives. So she became really curious and wanted to find the common denominator. And she came up with kind of like a formula for resilience, which means that anybody, there's some things that you can't control, some things you can. She found that one of the common denominators was for these children, they had a strong bond with a parent, a caregiver, or even a mentor. It didn't have to be their parent. It could be a coach. It could be the babysitter. But there was one person in their lives who was older than them that they had a strong bond with. Oops. Other findings were the rest of the findings, so this is where things we can do, were psychological and how the children basically responded to their environment, which, as we said, was a challenging environment. So this helps us get a little look into the psychology of resilience. The resilient children, as opposed to the others, tended to be autonomous and independent. So they were curious, and they didn't rely on somebody to tell them so much what to do. They were more independent than other children and depended on themselves more. They sought out new experiences. They were industrious and resourceful. So they felt like there's something they could do. And they used whatever skills that they had effectively. And this is without really the encouragement of their parents or going to a Montessori school or anything like this. Just on their own. Naturally, this is how the children were. But we can learn, even as adults, the more industrious and resourceful we are, the more we can identify our skills and use them effectively, then the more resilient we can become. So it's not just for children, but if you're a parent, you might want to encourage your children to be more like that. One of the most important things, as I'd said yesterday, was a strong internal locus of control. The internal locus of control is just the feeling that you have that I can make a difference. There's something I can do in this circumstance. Not only am I important, but I can shift this circumstance or take action somehow. And somehow these kids just naturally had that feeling, even though they couldn't change their circumstance. They couldn't have a different parent. They couldn't stop their parent from drinking, etc. They couldn't change the dysfunction in their family, but somehow in their own minds, they felt like I have some control in my life. Isn't that amazing? At these young ages, they felt I have some control in my life. We can translate that to as adults, when we feel like I have some control in my life or this circumstance, then we tend to be practicing resilience. They felt they could orchestrate their own fate, even though they didn't realize that they couldn't. They didn't have as much power as they thought they did. But in their own minds, they did. So this is what Werner found. Werner found that resiliency or resilience can change. It's a balance of which is carrying more weight, the stressors or the things that are happening in your life versus your own resilience. And at some point, sometimes the scale tips. I think I have a tipping scale there. And someone who at one point was very resilient can actually lose it So you can gain resilience or you can lose resilience. Sometimes in our lives, we feel like we're very resilient, and then something happens, and you suddenly feel like I'm not as strong a person as I used to be. So when you let the stressors of your life feel like they're heavier or have more power than your internal control, then you've shifted the scale in a non-resilient way, if that makes sense. She states that most people have a breaking point. What's interesting is the people who were not resilient earlier in life, in the study, many of them learned resilience. They overcame adversity in life, and then eventually they also flourished. So these younger group of kids, they just flourished naturally. The other group, they had to learn resilience later in life, and then eventually they also, a certain degree of them, also flourished, which tells us that we can learn resilience. One of the things that makes a big difference with resilience, as we said, is perspective. So I want to go back to a study that was done on the biological and psychological perspectives of resilience. Is it possible to improve stress resistance and gain more resilience? So stress resistance, meaning you're in a difficult situation, maybe things in your life aren't going the way you want them to, or maybe just suddenly something has happened. How do you become more resilient in that situation? And those are the types of situations that when you sit in them for long enough, people become depressed, they feel hopeless or helpless, and that leads to low mood or experiencing depression. The term resilience refers to the ability to adapt successfully to stress, to trauma, and adversity, enabling individuals to avoid stress-induced mental disorders such as depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and anxiety. So those are the mental health conditions that we already talked about on day number 1. But basically, when you build up your resilience and you're able to adapt to even trauma, then it helps you to avoid those stress-induced mental disorders. Stress resilience can be improved, but the outcomes and effects depends on the type of intervention. The name of this study was the Biological and Psychological Perspectives of Resilience, and it was from Frontiers of Human Neuroscience in 2018. So this is not particularly me. And the species, I think these were studies that may have been done on mice. Animal models have dramatically improved our understanding of the neural substrates underlying resilience. They've been less useful in defining the interactions between environmental stress, protective factors, and individual personalities. For example, increased self-criticism and decreased self-compassion enhance the risk of depression in humans. Did everyone hear that? Increased self-criticism, decreased self-compassion enhance the risk of depression in humans. So if you do it the opposite way, instead of being self-critical, but having more self-compassion, that might help lift you out of depression or avoid depression. Part of self-criticism, people call it stinking thinking, but it's negative self-talk. Increased negative self-talk and having a lack of compassion for yourself puts you at higher risk for depression, according to this study, which I think is true. And we talked about positive self-talk as a preventative step from depression. Psychosocial factors that contribute to resilience have been identified. The factors include active coping optimism, cognitive reappraisal. Cognitive reappraisal means you take a look back at that situation and you're able to get a little bit of objectivity on the situation. Pro-social behavior, social support, and others. So I think it was Monday I had said one of the top factors in happiness was found to be social interaction. So social support, and that social interaction doesn't have to be ongoing social interaction with the same person, just going out and saying hello to people when you're buying your groceries at Bilo, maybe, and having a nice little chat with that person and feeling like I've connected with someone. Social interaction is so important for happiness. Social support is one of the main protective elements that influence family well-being, parenting quality, and child resilience. So hopefully it's something that we can provide to our children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, etc. This was a 10-year-long longitudinal study found that social support from partners promoted resilience in response to economic stress. Finances are going down, but you have that support of your partner despite the difficult situation. And this was a 10-year study. Despite that difficult situation, the support of a partner really makes a difference when it comes to resilience in difficult situations. They were looking at economic stress in particular, the onset of psychiatric disorders such as PTSD and depression might be prevented by promoting adaptation to stress. The key to resilience and mental well-being lies in emotional regulation or emotion regulation processes. Or processes. I think some of the things we already talked about are part of emotional regulation. I had mentioned 2 Auschwitz survivors yesterday. I couldn't remember the name of the second person, but her name was Edith Edgar. Has anyone heard of Edith Edgar? I think she's probably maybe 90 or so, 90 years young. But Edith was taken into a concentration camp at the age of 16, and later, as an adult, became a psychotherapist, psychologist. She's actually doing podcasts now, at between 80 and 90 years old, and doing podcasts, which is amazing. But she was in obviously a very traumatic situation, and she was depressed after. And then she came out of that post-traumatic stress by looking back at that situation and having a different perspective. But even when she was in this situation, she was practicing this different perspective. She would say to herself, as I'd mentioned, she would say to the guard in her own mind, I am free and you're the prisoner. And when the guards were yelling at her, whatever the case, she would say in her own mind, I'm free, you're the prisoner, I'm free. You're the prisoner, because she wanted to kind of solidify this idea that she might be in prison, but she's a free person in prison. And then she went on to become a psychotherapist and now gives talks, etc. But she was able to have a different perspective during the trauma and then a different perspective after the trauma, which, according to this study, is so important. It is generally acknowledged that resilience buffers against various types of stress. So that's why we're focusing a little more on resilience. Understanding resilience. Significant research has been done on the psychosocial factors of stress tolerance and resilience building. Cognitive processes, personality traits, and active coping mechanisms, among others, contribute to resilience. These qualities also interact with biological factors to enhance adaptation in the face and aftermath of traumatic events, and they all help to confer resilience. Characteristics such as having a high level of intellectual functioning. So 1, we would hope everyone here, in order to become more resilient, has a high level of intellectual functioning. Important. Efficient self-regulation, meaning you're regulating your self-talk, you're regulating your emotions. Active coping styles, optimism. We keep seeing optimism coming up. And secure attachment. Something that we can't secure attachment basically is how you grew up in your relationship with your parents. So something we can't necessarily change at this point. Were observed in youth who faced adverse situations and settings, yet did not succumb to the adverse impact of extreme stress. So that secure attachment could be with, as Emmy Werner discovered, one adult in your life. It didn't have to be a parent. And this is from the frontiers of behavioral neuroscience. So what were some of those things that I talked about? One of them was optimism. I don't know if saying I'm optimistic again and again and again makes you optimistic, but you have to practice optimism. So, significant optimism, also from this article. So, significant optimism, positive affect, or meaning our demeanor, has been found to be protective in the face of stress in numerous studies. In addition to decreasing autonomic arousal upon stress exposure, meaning in addition to decreasing having a fight or flight response, positive affect is also associated with quicker recovery times, better overall physical health. So yes, you might get stressed out, but you recover faster just by having a little more optimism. How can we have a little more optimism? I will ask you. Go ahead, George.
Well, I read a story about a soldier that was captured. He was put into a dungeon of a cell and was tortured every day.
Oh my God.
Now, there was half a dozen of them, but this particular soldier had just got married and left his bride at home. They were talking about building a house when he left. He built his house board by board by board. They broke them other half a dozen soldiers, but they never broke this soldier because he kept his mind on something other than anything they tried to do. He was building his house board by board, and they could never change him.
So he was building his house in his mind,
In his
board by board. Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Board by board in his mind, and the windows the way they were going to be, how the house was going to look when it was finished, and
Yeah.
everything. And that went on for 3 years,
Wow.
and they never broke him.
Yeah. I love that. That's kind of like the positive visualization. So in his mind, he was having a different experience intentionally than the physical experience in the outside world. And that was a little bit like this Auschwitz survivor, a little bit like Viktor Frankl as well. And so having that fortitude of mind where what's happening inside of you and what's happening outside of you are two different things. Yes, go ahead, Glenn.
We haven't really talked about it, but faith is a thing that gives a person that fortitude.
Right.
If they believe in something strong, usually your faith is optimistic.
Absolutely.
Something positive is involved, and
Yeah.
that gives greater flexibility, greater resilience. I know of people that have used prayer when they were in a really difficult situation, and it's made a difference for them.
Yeah.
Obviously, they have to establish that ahead of time somewhat.
Yeah, I love that Bible verse from Romans chapter 8, verse 28. God works all things together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. Like, that's a step of faith, believing that in this situation, somehow, God's going to work it for good, for my good and the good of everyone involved. You'd have to have a level of faith to think somehow in this difficult situation, it's going to be used for good, or there will be good coming out of it, which is kind of like the silver lining. Yes, go ahead.
There was a woman who used to live in this town, who was a friend of mine, and when she told me when she was 10 years old, she was raped. And when she said she couldn't talk afterwards, and she went home, and her father saw that her dress was torn. He said, you've been fighting, and he beat her, actually. And she said she left the house and went down to the river and started praying. And she said, Jesus came across the water to me and said, you're going to be all right. She said, even if I made it up, it was true. In the same way that if Jesus walked through this wall right now, it would impress us a great deal.
Right.
Anyways, it's an example. And she said that there'd been she was a Catholic and she was used to praying and whatnot, so she had this sort of established. But she had this experience that probably saved her in a lot of ways. Otherwise, I mean, kids don't do well if things like that happen to them when they're 10 years old.
Yeah. I think I personally have had times where I was having, like a stressful meltdown, basically. And then I've taken a moment to do the breathing, but to also pray. Like, Lord, in this situation, I just don't know what to do. I don't see how. I didn't have the, like, look at it from several perspectives. It more felt like an insurmountable situation, which is what the American Psychological Association said. Don't see it as insurmountable. Insurmountable association, like, God, I just don't see how this is going to work out. And then prayed and did breathing and prayer. And afterwards, it was like my mind was just so peaceful, so calm, that just a little answer came. Why not try this? Which I would say is the Holy Spirit. And then just that sense of it's possible. Just this little thing's possible. It's like everything just opened up from there. And so I definitely believe that prayer makes a huge difference and that God's helping us in those circumstances, for sure. I think when you have that faith, then you can think, I don't see the answer, but somehow I know that God can help me, or there is an answer. Any other comments? Sometimes it does. Sometimes just that our own belief actually affects our own behavior as well. When you think something is not going to work, then you behave differently than when you think, okay, I believe this is possible. I don't quite know how. You behave and you take different actions and different steps as well. So optimism, very important. And faith could be a significant kind of thread, major thread within optimism. And what they found with the positive affect, at least in this article from the Frontiers on Behavioral Neuroscience, is when they had that positive affect, then their stress response was not as intense and not as long. Something like the mice who were dropped into the cold water. I mean, their stress response was not as long, but their brain was secreting GABA because they've been exercising. This is more like within our control as humans. I'm optimistic. Similarly, optimism herein defined as, and this is the definition of optimism from this article. Optimism is defined as the expectation for good outcomes. So similarly, optimism, herein defined as the expectation for good outcomes, has been consistently associated with the employment of active coping strategies, subjective well-being, physical health, and larger and more fulfilling social networks and connections. So this isn't the type of optimism that is like delusion. This is just a general life attitude. Optimism meaning you're expecting good outcomes. And then there are all these wonderful things that are associated with it. People who expect good outcomes have better physical health. They have more fulfilling social networks. They have better and more fulfilling connections. And they cope better with difficulties in life. I'm optimistic. So again, from this article, significant optimism. Unlike pessimists, optimists reported less hopelessness and helplessness, and I think those two things are the major factor. When people are in a lower mood or depressed, they feel hopeless, they feel helpless. So unlike pessimists, optimists reported less hopelessness, less helplessness, and they're less likely to use avoidance as a coping mechanism when under duress. People who are pessimists would prefer to avoid situations, denial, avoidance, etc., but then the situation doesn't necessarily get any better. Again, from the Frontiers on Behavioral Neuroscience, reframing, they talked about that in this study. It's just about seeing things differently, and obviously I spelt that wrong. Seen things differently is supposed to be seeing things differently. Strongly associated with resilience is the ability to monitor and assess negative thoughts, replace those negative thoughts with positive thoughts, and with cognitive reappraisal. Instead of seeing it this way, can I see it a different way? Is it possible that I could find some objectivity in this situation? Known as cognitive flexibility or cognitive reframing, this emotion regulation strategy involves changing the way one views events or situations, consciously reassessing adverse or traumatic events to find that silver lining is one of the key things that's associated with resilience. So consciously reassessing adverse or traumatic events. That might be adverse or traumatic events in our past. Can you see it differently now? Which often happens as an adult and you're looking back at a childhood event. Is there any way I can see that traumatic event differently to find a silver lining in it, which is associated with resilience? And you know, I was thinking, actually, Glenn, you made me think of a story actually about a young woman who was also mistreated, let's say in a similar way, by a family member, and then carried that for most of their life. But then in consciously reassessing that event, she could see because of that event, that family member was out of her life, like looking for a silver lining, like it's so much better that they were out of her life than that person continued to be in their life. So maybe not able to see a bit of a silver lining in that situation, that at least that did not continue, let's say, if I'm speaking in a roundabout way, but hopefully everybody got what I was saying. Okay, so the bottom line is this. How do you see it? So consciously reassessing that event so that you can see the silver lining, as opposed to consciously reliving the event, which leads into a spiral of depression. How do you see it as a key factor in reframing and a key factor in resilience? So let's practice a little bit of how do we see it. So looking at these pictures, maybe you can just yell out, well, I'll ask, how many people see somewhere here a man playing a saxophone? Okay. When you look at the picture of the man playing a saxophone, how many people see something else? Okay. Only a couple people can see the other thing. Okay. So with the man playing the saxophone, there's another picture there. And it's the face of a young woman. Can everybody see the face of a young woman? Do you see it now? Is there anybody who does not see the face of a young woman? Henry, you don't see it yet? Terrence, you can't see the face of a young woman? It's an interesting perspective, isn't it? It's there. But it's all about how you see it. There's the handle of a revolver. What? I can't see a revolver in there anyway. It's the orange car. Okay, go ahead.
Here's the handle of the revolver. Both ways. Here's the trigger.
Trigger, right? Yep. I see that. No, that's negative now.
I don't know. Maybe I don't know what a revolver looks like well enough to. It is like the orange car, though. Yes, go ahead, Henry.
But the other one has also two people.
Oh, yeah, we haven't gotten to the other one yet. Oh, you've given away the answer. Right. So is there anyone here who doesn't see the young woman still? Terrence? And Randy, you're seeing guns. So, over here to the upper right is an eye, another eye.
Oh, I see it now.
Oh, I see it now. The two eyes.
Oh my goodness, it just popped.
Awesome. Right. So that's all you can see. Once it's been revealed, you can't not see the young woman, and you can't not see the man playing the saxophone. I can not see the revolver because I haven't really found it yet. Just an idea of perception. two things are there at the same time, and you could say within a predicament in your life, is it possible to see another side of that predicament? And you can practice that tonight when you go home, or you can think of a predicament in the past, something you thought was terrible that happened to you. Is it possible to see another side of that event? Maybe, was there any good that came out of that at all that you can see now, today, that you couldn't see at that time, or that's developed over time? Okay, looking at the other picture, how many people here see two faces? Oh, wow, okay. And is there anyone here who does not see two faces?
Well, there could be an antique vase.
Wait, don't say that. So everybody, at least everyone sees two faces, correct? Yes, okay. What is the other thing that's there? A vase. How many people here see a vase? Okay. So there's nobody here who cannot both see two faces and a vase at the same time.
Unless you call the vase a chalice.
A chalice or a vase or a callus. But yes, Tim, what don't you see?
Well, I see everything, but what I find interesting is
Yes.
what I first saw. Then when I saw the other stands out more.
Right. Yes. What did you see at first?
Well, I saw the saxophone player first, and I didn't see the
The girl? Yes.
Now
But
she's just alive.
right. You know what's really amazing? It's when you try to see them both at the same time, it's like your brain is wobbling like back and forth. But yeah, back and forth, but unable to do both exactly at the same time. Your brain's multitasking? Is there anybody here who was not able to see either a woman, a saxophone player, two people facing each other, or a vase? So there are 4 pictures up here, plus a gun that maybe some people are seeing and some people aren't seeing. It is just an easy way of just demonstrating that it could be the same situation, the same thing, 2 different ways, or many different ways of seeing it. So there was a clinical psychologist named George Bonanno. And according to this clinical psychologist who heads the Loss, Trauma, and Emotion Lab at Columbia University, one of the central elements of resilience is perception, as we've been saying it. Perception. And we are the ones who are in charge of our own perception. Like that man who was building a house in his mind. He was perceiving something different in some ways happening than what was happening on the outside. We have control, if we can find it, of our own perception of any circumstance in our lives. Basically, Bonanno puts it like this. Do you conceptualize an event as traumatic, or do you conceptualize that event as an opportunity to learn and grow? So instead of post-traumatic disorder, it's post-growth order, or post-growth syndrome, maybe. How do you perceive the event? And he dealt with and worked with trauma survivors, you would say. And that's basically, that was his basis of his work. Do you conceptualize this event as traumatic? Can you see this event as an opportunity to learn and grow? And sometimes when that is posed, can you see this event as an opportunity to learn and grow? The answer is no, absolutely not. This is terrible and it's unacceptable, etc., etc. People don't want to see it as an opportunity to learn and grow. And sometimes people want to, I think it's natural to want to claim onto that identity of this is what happened to me, this is my story, this is who I am. There's nothing in this where I could see there's space where I could grow as a person. But Bonanno believed that there's an opportunity to learn and grow in every situation. And then it's up to us to find that. Bonanno uses the term PTE. Instead of saying it was a traumatic event, he uses the term PTE, a potentially traumatic event. So he might say you experienced a PTE, a potentially potentially, ugh, I will be having some water after this, potentially traumatic event, but it's still before 7 p.m., so I have 5 minutes to get the water in. Basically saying that events are not traumatic until we experience them in our own perception and experience as traumatic. Every event has the potential to be traumatic or not. Basically, the experience of the event is not built into the event itself. The experience lies in the psychological construct of the event in the person who's experiencing the event. Does that make sense?
I'm not in your body, so therefore I can't tell you how you feel.
Yes. But even in my own body, I could say it's not a trauma because I choose to experience it differently. So he says, until we experience something as trauma, it's not trauma. It might not be good. It might be a terrible occurrence, but personally, it's not trauma until you experience it as a trauma. Bonanno says that these stressful or traumatic events don't have as much predictive power as we think they do. The negative response is what is predictive. If it becomes traumatizing to someone or not, it's based on their response to the situation. Does that make sense? Yes? No? So? What did they experience, though? They experienced an event. So he's saying that it doesn't have to be a traumatic event if you don't experience it as a traumatic event.
Yeah, I guess so. It sounds almost to me like he's trying to redefine trauma, but, you may, trauma, people all deal with trauma differently, and it's how you come out of that trauma, right? Is that what you're saying? It's how you move forward from it?
It's how you move forward from it and how you experience it, and then how you objectively, if you can get to objectivity, see it when you're out of the situation, whatever the situation is. So basically, two people, so he says P as in potentially traumatic. Two people could have the exact same experience. One person experiences it as personal trauma, and the other person doesn't. It's an event that occurred in their life, but they're not traumatized by it. So are you traumatized by that event or not? And then dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, okay, now can you view it differently so it's not a personally traumatizing event? Dealing with the event, exactly. And that's how he's been working with people who have experienced potentially traumatic events. Kind of like taking the fire out of it, taking the fire and the fuel out of it a little bit. As I said with Emmy Werner's study, I just want to put everything in one slide so you can see this summary. The 4 main things in Emmy Werner's 32-year-long resilience study. Number 1, a strong bond with a supportive parent, caregiver, or mentor. And is it possible to look back and think, oh, I did have a strong bond? But she found with those children who were resilient that was a key factor. Number 2, resilient children were autonomous and they were independent. Number 3, they sought out new experiences and they were industrious, using whatever skills they had, they used them effectively. And number 4, they had a strong internal locus of control. And that was one of the most important things. This means they felt they could orchestrate their own fate. They could make a difference in their own lives. And I really, George, I really like that example that you gave, because that soldier felt that he had some kind of control to orchestrate his own fate, even though this possibly ongoing traumatic thing was happening to him. There was another study. What was that? It saved him, exactly. Where others would have succumbed to those two things we talked about, hopelessness and helplessness, which create depression and eventually giving up. Go ahead.
Well, humor can change a situation very dramatically. My father-in-law was one of the only people that had a car way back in the 50s, and the roads weren't exactly in the shape they are today. So we were stuck quite a few times. Well, he used to pick up a couple of natives that waited on the road for him because they knew he could get a ride, and we were badly stuck. So anyway, we were going to jack up the car, and in the old times you just had a single jack that you jacked up. He just got the car jacked up, ready to put the limbs and whatever we could put under the wheels, and the jack slipped and went down.
Oh.
Well, my father-in-law was a little temperamental, and he turned the air blue for a few minutes. He cussed and said, "This no good 2-bit jack." One of the natives said, "Next time, Ed," he said, "you buy 4-bit jack," he said, "work much better."
2-bit jack, right?
That dispersed the bad part. We all had a good laugh. We got the car out and went home.
Right. Humor makes such a difference. But it also does cause the release of those hormones that we talked about, those chemicals from yesterday. The release of dopamine, the release of serotonin, the release of endorphins. I love the saying, it's just not funny yet. You know, like this thing has happened, but at some point I'm going to look back at it and think, that was pretty funny what happened. When I was a teenager and my early 20s, though I couldn't quite capture it with failing. It took me many years to get there. But that was what I'd say. If something difficult happened, I'd think, you know, maybe in a little while I'm going to look back at this and think it's really funny. And that helped me to get past that situation. And then a week or two later, I would look back at it and find the humor in it. So instead of finding a silver lining, I found humor in whatever was occurring. And that's something that you do within your own mind. But yes, a joke or something like that can really change and shift the mood for everyone. This was a 40-year-long study that was done, similar to Emmy Werner's study. So her study was 32 years. Imagine being like a psychologist or a therapist and having the tenacity to keep this study going for like 4 decades. His name was Norman Garmezi. He was a developmental psychologist at the University of Minnesota, and he did a 40-year-long study on resilience. In this study, there were children who had difficult childhoods. They were from low socioeconomic backgrounds. They experienced traumatic events, and he focused on children who were socially competent. So despite that, they were socially competent. They were cognitively competent, so kind of sharp kids. Academically competent, so they're doing well in school despite all of these difficulties at home. And Garmezi found that these were predictors in success in adulthood and children who had faced adversity in childhood. But these components, these competencies were as successful as peers. Ugh. But those who had these competencies were as successful as peers who had not faced such adversity. So the kids who were socially competent, cognitively competent, academically competent did just as well in adulthood as their peers who hadn't had difficult or dysfunctional childhood or childhoods. Does that make sense? 40 years following them. So yes, something can happen in our childhood, but often those things come out in adulthood. But 40 years later, he's still finding that these kids are doing really, really well. Yes, go ahead.
Jackie and I fostered when we were down at the coast.
Okay.
At one point, we had 2 brothers came over there. One was, I believe, 16, and his younger brother was at the time. And they had some real trauma in their lives. Like the older boy came home from school one day and found his father hanging
Wow.
in the house. And he had to cut him down. and a couple of years later, their mom passed away from cancer. What I see on the screen is these two boys. They had all of these attributes to them.
Wow.
Why they did, I have no idea. But it seemed to us that they had no trauma in their lives whatsoever.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
they're-
as adults
As
now, yeah,
adults.
so that's what this study was about. How do these kids turn out in adulthood?
Amazing, both of them.
Doing amazing. Wow. I love that. That's just so encouraging. There was a study called the ACEs study, which is Adverse Childhood Experience Studies. And with the ACEs study, they found that if you had experienced, there was a list of 10 things during childhood. And those things kind of determined whether or not you would be a thriving and successful adult. And some of them were things that were studied in Norman Garmazzi's study and in Emmy Werner's study. So alcoholism, a sibling who had gone to jail, single parent, death of a parent, divorce, moving, emotional, physical abuse, or other kinds of abuse. Okay, I don't remember, where am I at there? 9. There might be one other. But the assumption was if you had these things occur, and if you had a certain number, I think it was above 5 of those things occur, then the deduction was that as an adult, that you would have a dysfunctional adulthood, teenage pregnancy, alcoholism, repeat the abuse, etc. But I love these studies. So I don't really support the ACEs score that much. Like some psychologists do use the ACEs score. Okay, what happened to you when you were a child? Okay, check, 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 check. But I love these studies that show that despite all of those, there were kids who grew up as adults who were resilient. Not everyone, but it also shows that when we learn the tools for resilience, as Emmy Werner found, she found some of the adults that they learned these tools as adults, and then they also became just as successful. So it's encouraging if naturally as a child the adversity was there and you didn't succeed, as an adult you can still learn the tools of resilience and still succeed even now. Go ahead, Glenn.
He chose to study children that had these characteristics. It would be really interesting to know why they had those characteristics. Because, I mean, isn't that the main issue? I mean, if you've got those, you're going to do okay. But how do you get them is the issue.
Right. I think they were common denominator characteristics that he discovered.
So he studied a number of children that didn't have them too?
Correct. And so he discovered that those were predictors. Like out of the kids who did well in adulthood, looking back, those were the common denominators he found. They were socially competent, cognitively competent, academically competent, and despite the difficulties, they did well. But Emmy Werner found those other 4 things so she discovered those as components of resilience.
Yes, I've heard that if you don't have the mentor or important person in your life, the chances of you being successful are small.
I would say that important person is a key factor in her studies. It wasn't here, so this was just more traits of the kids.
Well, you could imagine in this one, if you didn't learn how to read, you'd be a failure.
Yeah, right.
Which means a person with certain learning disabilities, even though
It would be difficult.
be difficult
Right.
to be in that thing.
Yeah. But I do like the characteristics of resilience that we could learn as adults. So this is looking back at kids, but even as adults, we can still learn resilience characteristics and become a success. And in her study, reading wasn't one of the factors. Yeah.
Are you
They were psychological, her findings.
Are you familiar with this guy, Bernie Siegel, who
Yep.
does exceptional cancer? Because he's chosen certain characteristics that people that survive cancer tend to have, which
I
is
think he focused on happiness, no?
he had, in one of his things he had 5. One was having a clear sense of purpose, being playful, loving yourself, and tending to have positive thoughts. I mean, they fit pretty well with these things. There was one other one which I'm not remembering right now, but anyways, and they're all learnable.
Yes,
So because he's trying to make the people resilient who have got
exactly.
cancer.
Yeah. And I think part of Bernie Siegel's focus, if I'm right, was how it was on like happiness and how to become happier in life. And love? Oh, yes. So that it comes back to the self-criticism and lack of self-compassion, and flipping that, having more compassion or love for yourself and having more positive talk for yourself, which are things that we can do as teenagers, as young adults, as seniors, ongoingly. Does anyone have any other comments or questions about this study? Do you have a comment, Jackie?
When you said that about the self-talk, I just looked at Jim and I said my sister's name, because I have a sister, my youngest sister. Her whole life since we were kids, she was just, if she walks past the mirror, she goes, "Hi, gorgeous."
Right.
She's just so positive.
Yes,
Self-talks all the time.
right.
So that just kind of reminded me of her. I mean, I don't do that, but she just all the time. Anything that get a lemon, make lemonade, or what, like she,
Right.
she's just positive. And I think some people are just gifted that way. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the studies found 50% of happiness is based on genes. So maybe part of it is genetic for her. But she's practicing. She is doing the self-talk. She is doing the actions of optimism, which was because she's hearing it herself and it's going back, which was part of that study on Seek Optimism. I do run a weight loss program, and what I encourage my patients to say is that basically to believe it's possible. So some patients will say, I've tried everything, no matter what, I can't lose weight. And then I think, okay, part of this, am I talking to that? I'm talking to you. And I think part of this, the success in this journey, it could be months. Like part of that is just changing that attitude. When I know I've kind of broken that, I wouldn't say broken, but changed in a better way, then I think this person's probably going to lose weight. And then when they can change their self-talk, so I say the first step towards succeeding in that goal of weight loss is love. Like I'll ask everyone, what do you think the first step in weight loss is? Intermittent fasting, not eating at night, exercise. I'll be like, love's the first step. And they'll be like, no, I think it's intermittent fasting. But I'll say having that self-compassion. So I'm doing well. I lost a pound this week, or I exercise. All right, fantastic. And then getting rid of the negative self-talk. So I encourage them to say it out loud like your sister, and maybe write it on a mirror and say out loud, I'm doing really well. This is possible, or whatever the positive statement is, so they can get it into their mind so it becomes their approach to making those health changes. So I like that your sister's doing that. But even as a kid, she kind of gripped onto that tool, let's say. Any other comments? But you're called conceited. Well, I guess if, it could all be about the way you look completely. I'm so gorgeous. I'm tall. And my hair is wonderful. But focusing more on personality traits and your abilities would be the keys to resilience. So commonalities. So how loved you felt as a child is a great predictor of how you manage all kinds of difficult situations later in life. This is according to Bessel van der Kolk. He's a professor of psychiatry at Boston University School of Medicine. Bessel van der Kolk has been researching post-traumatic stress since the 1970s. He's the founder of the Trauma Research Foundation in Boston. So it doesn't mean it's like in stone that if you didn't feel loved as a child, that you won't be able to manage difficulties later in life. But you might have to learn these tools and these resilience, different techniques in ways that someone else might not have to. Yes, go ahead, Janie. Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, part of it could be true, but like, you know, like, I don't know, maybe the parents treating different kids differently, which does happen, I think. And part of it could be their perception as a child. That's probably a major factor. So 2 kids growing up in the same house and one perceiving that they're being treated a certain way or perceiving, oh, this means that. So then as adults, they have very different experiences of what their childhood was. Definitely possible. So even the fraternal twin study, the Minnesota study with the identical twins, they tended to be happy, and then fraternal twins tended to have different experiences. So it's not necessarily your genes. You could be growing up in the same house, but have different perceptions of love, you can say. And sometimes it is. Sometimes parents have a favorite. I actually have a friend who just told me straight out, like, parents say they don't have a favorite, but they do. And my favorite is this person. And I was like, oh, okay. So, I mean, she wouldn't tell them, the kids, that, but she had a favorite. So yes, I would say definitely possible. Okay. This is from Professor Stephen Southwick. He's a, hi Glenn, see you tomorrow. He's a Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry, PTSD, and Resilience at Yale University School of Medicine, and the co-author of a book called Resilience, The Science of Mastering Life's Greatest Challenges. Doesn't that sound like a good book? Resilience, The Science of Mastering Life's Greatest Challenges. I mean, I feel like going and getting that book right now. Resilience, The Science of Mastering Life's Greatest Challenges. He says many resilient people learn to carefully accept what they can't change about a situation and then ask themselves what they can actually change. This reminds me of the Serenity Prayer. God, help me to accept the things I can't change, to change the things I can, and to know the difference. And the wisdom, thank you. And give me the wisdom to know the difference. Exactly. So many resilient people learn to accept what they can't change. They carefully accept it about a situation. And then they ask themselves, within this situation, what can I actually change? And then they do make a change. And I like that idea that within the situation, often what we can actually change is our perception of the situation, even if you can't change the situation yourself. So commonalities. The tools common to resilient people are, as I've said, optimism. That is also realistic optimism. Secondly, a moral compass. Thirdly, and as Glenn had said, religious or spiritual beliefs. Fourthly, cognitive and emotional flexibility. Are you able to see it differently? And finally, what they found in many, many, many studies on resilience, and this could also be on happiness, living with a higher mood, is social connectedness. Very important. Research has shown that dedication to a worthy cause or a belief in something greater than oneself. So this could be your volunteer work at the church, or helping. It's something outside of yourself that you believe is greater than yourself. It could be religiously, it could be spiritually, that just having that dedication has a resilience enhancing effect. So does spirituality or faith play a factor? Well, research shows that it does. Something greater than yourself, something outside of yourself that you believe is bigger. As does the ability to be flexible in your thinking. So imagine combining that. Imagine having the dedication, the belief in something greater than yourself, and combining it with the ability to be flexible in your thinking. Wow, that is a powerful combination. That's like, okay, I'm depending on God, if that's the thing greater than yourself, and I'm flexible in the way that I see things. Again, reminds me of Romans 8:28. I'm flexible and I'm looking for, there's got to be some good in this, and I believe God is in this, and God's going to make it good in some way. A common resilience habit is this: looking for opportunities that might exist even in the darkest of times. It's interesting, during the pandemic, when the pandemic initially started, I just heard about people being worried and fearful, and businesses closing, and people losing money, relationships falling apart. It just seemed like a lot of people I knew were suddenly splitting up and getting divorced, and challenges in people living in the same house when normally one person or both people are going to work, and they only spend their evenings together, and then on the weekends they get together, accomplish tasks. But now they're 24/7 in the same house, and maybe with a child who's doing virtual school. And so it just seemed like, let's say, the darkest times. But then I started actually doing these virtual, as I was, available and there was a computer, I started doing these virtual events and thinking, okay, what can I do with my time that is going to be positive? Okay, I want to continue teaching or learning Spanish. So I started studying Spanish. I started hopping on these Zoom events and started hearing about people who were doing all these incredible things during the pandemic. People whose business opportunities just took off and they made a lot of money. Or people who started doing online courses and online teaching since everyone was home online. And they saw that as a great opportunity in this dark time to do something different. People who shifted their businesses from in-person brick and mortar to, okay, we're totally going virtual now. And they saw opportunities where other people saw darkness. So you could say that those people were being resilient in a dark time. And that's a common resilience habit, looking for an opportunity that might exist even in this dark time. And I think really, really good business people tend to do that. Like somehow they find some way of making their business work, and regardless of what's happening. I remember hearing about just people who became very wealthy during the Depression, maybe in the 1930s, maybe not so many people, but people during the Depression who then invested, and it was an opportunity to buy a lot of, if they had money, to buy a lot of things, like everything was on sale. And then was that land, right, at these very low prices. And then suddenly, when coming out of the Depression, the prices went up and suddenly you've made a lot of money. Land. Commonalities. Each of us has to figure out what our particular challenges are and then determine how to get through them at the current moment in time. This is what George Bonanno, that professor that I'd referred to, who calls traumatic events, PTEs. That's his advice. Each of us has to figure out what our particular challenges are, then determine how to get through them at the current moment in time, at that time. He's a professor of clinical psychology, the director, as I said, of the Lost Trauma and Emotion Lab at Columbia University Teachers College. Summary of resilience, 7 main characteristics. So I'm trying to combine a series of things that we've already said. Number 1, they have a positive, realistic outlook. Notice positive and realistic go together. So I've heard of extreme optimism, I don't like the word delusional, but unrealistic optimism, unrealistically positive. Well, a resilience characteristic is that combination. It's realistic and it's positive. They don't dwell on negative information, and instead they look for opportunities in bleak situations, striving to find the positive within the negative. Can you find the positive within the negative? Second, they have a moral compass. Highly resilient people have a solid sense of what they consider to be right and wrong, and that tends to guide their decisions. Thirdly, they have a belief in something greater than themselves. This is often found through religious or spiritual practices. The community support that comes from being part of a religion can also enhance resilience. And I think that's just part of feeling like you're not completely alone. Fourthly, they're altruistic. They have a concern for other people and a degree of selflessness. They're often dedicated to causes that they find to be meaningful, and this gives them a sense of purpose. And even having a sense of purpose during a difficult time could be enough to pull you through. They accept, number 6, I think, they accept what they cannot change, and they focus energy on what they can change. Dr. Southwick says resilient people reappraise a difficult situation, and they look for meaningful opportunities within that difficult situation. And finally, I think they have a mission, a meaning, a purpose. Feeling committed to a meaningful mission in life gives them courage and gives them strength. And this is the final one. They have a social support system, and in turn, they support others. So they're not isolated, as I was saying the other day, that isolation is a factor that leads to low mood, depression, etc. They have a social support system. They support others as well. Very few resilient people, said Dr. Southwick, go it alone. Go ahead, George.
I just read a piece in the paper today about a fellow who was born without arms and legs.
Okay.
When he was 10 to 12 years old, he contemplated suicide. His parents talked him out of it and convinced him that he should read the Bible and follow the terms that was in the Bible. When he read a part in John, God helped a blind man. And in his mind he said, if God can help a blind man, maybe he has a plan for me. Now it's hard to believe that this man with no arms, no legs, was a millionaire by the time he was 27 years old.
Wow.
Because he believed that God had a plan for him.
Amen.
And today he is considered one of the most energetic and the most loved motivational speakers.
Really?
And like I said, when he was put down by some people, and the banker told him, if you don't take your money out, we're going to confiscate your money. He took the money out of that bank. There was another lady who was having problems. They got together and they started a bank.
They started a bank?
They started a bank.
All
and
right.
today they are a huge bank. Now here was a man with no arms, no legs. And when he was born, everybody thought he was a drag on society. And instead, his optimistic attitude, once he started reading the Bible, has changed his whole life and changed everybody's life around him.
Wow.
And he has a beautiful wife and children.
Yeah, he's
Really?
married with 4 children. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
And we think that we've got it bad, exactly.
all over the world.
Wow. Well, that just brings me back to the idea of gratitude. You know, we think we have it bad, but if we could only just be grateful. Yep. Walking in someone else's shoes. Amen. I'm just going to ask one more time if anyone wants to share a difficult situation that maybe now you could see as not so difficult, or maybe you could find an answer for. Go ahead, Jackie.
My mom, thank God, we praise for her, God for her every day. She just turned 90.
Mm-hmm.
My father died 6 years ago. He was 85.
Okay.
Shortly before he died, like the last couple years were difficult. He went into dementia. He was in and out of dementia. I was really hard on my mom, and us girls, there's 4 girls and 1 boy, we're very close. We're a year apart. And toward the very end, we had to put him in a home, which was just heartbreaking for Mum. We had him at home as long as we could, and we had care aides in, and my mom was a nurse when she worked. So this was just heartbreaking. But at the very end, he couldn't walk, he couldn't stand, and so we couldn't care for him. So we had to put him in a facility, a home. It was his home, where he was for the last 2 years. And we used to go visit every day. He had a visitor every single day. So we made sure that the family circled, and he was never alone. Sometimes when we went to visit him, we were having a real tough time when he couldn't remember us or recognize us, or he couldn't talk to us. He didn't know who we were. And I took my mom to a class on how to deal with dementia. Because he wasn't fully gone. Like, he'd have good days where he knew who we were. But on the days when he didn't, it was really tough, and it was hard on my mom. So, long story short, we got together with my sisters and we said, you know what? This is just getting so depressing. This is not Dad. It was not how he would want to live. Let's just have some fun with dementia. I know it sounds
Fun
crazy.
with dementia.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I got this out of the class that I took when one girl had said how they were dealing with it in her family. So we learned that the person, the patient, is always correct.
Okay.
Do not try to reason with them. You can't. And that was difficult for my mom. So what we started to do was, with the hard things, we just started to laugh and have fun. Like one time Tim and I went, and Tim knew my dad for 25 years. So, well, 23. But we got there one day for the visit, and I said, "Hi, Dad." And he looked at me, and he remembered me, and he says, "Hi, how are you?" And Tim says, "Hi, Dad." He looks up at Tim, he goes, "Dad? Who are you calling Dad?" Well, he obviously didn't recognize Tim in that moment. Well, we laughed. And we just laughed. Whereas before we were like, "Oh, poor Dad, poor." We laughed about it, and all the way home we laughed about it. And then my sister would go and she would phone me the next day, say, "Oh, I had a lovely visit with Dad. He thought it was Jackie, and I was just Jackie for that whole visit." So we played it, and now when we talk about the stories, we tell these kind of stories, and it's just so funny. So what could have been just, it was heartbreaking, but we turned it into laughter.
Yes.
And my mom learned, one day my mom went to visit, and he said, who are you? And she said, I'm Lurleen, I'm your wife. "You're not my young, beautiful wife." My mom was, you could see her face, she was about to be hurt, and then she just started to laugh. She said, "Oh, yes, I am." Well, the next day she went, he's like, "Hello, my darling."
Oh, really?
So, yes. So we turned that illness into laughter, and that's how
Right.
we got through it.
All right. Amen. That is great. You were able to do a little bit of reappraisal and then behave or act differently. That's awesome. As we're finishing the summary of resilience and moving into like the final bit of this evening, I just wanted to do a recap. It was more for some of the people who were here, who are not here now, because I had talked about natural therapies on Monday. Natural therapies for that can be effective or helpful for depression, anxiety, mental health, etc. And there were people who were here yesterday, and I thought they weren't here on Monday. So I'll end this presentation with that, but I think some of those people have left, and we might be here with everyone who was here on Monday. So this recap is also for you. We did talk a lot about sleep. We will be focusing more on the circadian rhythm tomorrow, and we touched on it yesterday. But we talked about the effects of poor sleep on mental health, and just a quick summary slide of sleep and mental health. So improving sleep can be a first step towards having better mental health or even coming out of a low or depressed mood. But we are doing all kinds of things before bed. We're distracted before sleep. We're watching movies. We're planning trips. We're maybe planning next year's romantic getaway. We're arranging meetings. We're watching music videos. We're crossing things off our list to do, our to-do list. We're checking the kids' soccer schedule, etc., etc., etc. Our minds are in all of these different places right before bed. So yesterday we ended by going through my 10 tips for better sleep. One of them was establishing a better pre-bedtime routine. So I just want to ask you, what are some of the things, the good things, that you do before bed that you find help you to sleep? Hopefully it's none of these things. And if it is, change these things. Go ahead, Terrence. Reading the Bible. Wonderful. Amen. No, not so it'll put you to sleep, but more so it will calm your mind. It can help to put you to sleep. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Well, I've been a prospector in my life, and I've had a lot of good times up in the mountains. Yes. And when I go to bed, I review some of the good times I had prospecting, and it's amazing. I fall asleep before I find anything.
As a prospector. Ba-dum-bum. Sorry, Henry, what were you saying?
Oh, you'll jazz Bach.
Oh, you listen to Bach, so you're listening to music before bed.
Yeah. Praising the Lord all
Amen.
the time.
One of the habits that I used to have, which I found was actually a habit for optimism, which I stopped doing, but then in preparing for a presentation like this, I remembered. So I myself have to implement it. And it's something like that, George, except I was prospecting and finding. So before bed, before falling asleep, I'd review the day and then think of the good things that had happened that day. Oh, this day, this happened, that happened, that happened. And then I'd fall asleep in a good and positive mood. So I was prospecting for good things, and I would find them before bed. Anything else that anyone's doing right now? Yes. Okay. All right. And you didn't wake up last night. Did you have the lavender going? So that's we're coming to that slide. Did you have the lavender going just before bed only, or for hours and hours and hours?
I put it on about half an hour before we went into bed.
6 hours. Excellent. And you slept through the night. Woot woot. All right.
What do you mean by lavender? Can you please elaborate a little bit? Oh, okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah. So we talked about that on day one. It's part of what we're going to review right now. So stopping all of those activities before sleep, before bed, can be helpful for resilience, because this way then we just get better sleeps. Getting better sleep can help with how you handle the next day and situations the next day. What they found with poor sleep is the next day your cortisol levels are already high the day after having a poor sleep, meaning you're already a little more wired, and you're going to respond with a quicker stress, like fight or flight response. Terrence? Absolutely. Absolutely. Poor sleep has a strong effect on blood pressure the next day. So I did volunteer work at a flea market for, I don't remember now, maybe 5 or 6 months. And part of the volunteer work, which was through a church, was they set up a blood pressure booth. So this was while I was still doing my licensing exams. So I'd finished school, but I wasn't licensed to practice. So I was kind of in that in-between phase. So I volunteered for the church. And people would come, and it was early in the morning on Sunday morning. So, and this was a non-church environment. So you can imagine Sunday morning, what came before Sunday morning was Saturday night. Right. So people would come, I'd take their blood pressure, I'd be like, wow, you know what, your blood pressure is really high. It's quite elevated. Really? Oh, it's never like that. Oh, okay. And then I started catching on, and of course, reviewing my notes, I could say. Then I'd say, okay, did you have a good sleep last night? No. Okay. Were you drinking last night? Yes. And we saw when we talked about sleep that alcohol leads to disrupted sleep. So you're drinking, yes. Do you still feel hungover now? A little bit. Poor sleep. And then a little bit of stress, because when people don't sleep well, they respond to stress more intensely than they would have had they not slept well. So it was like situation after situation where these people had high blood pressure on Sunday morning, poor sleeps on Saturday night. So yes, poor sleep definitely can play a factor. And then there's a question of, well, what if it's ongoing poor sleep? And would that be a contributing factor for blood pressure? And as we'll see tomorrow, because I have a slide with a summary of all the ways poor sleep affects us, is definitely a factor in high blood pressure. So as we continue on our summary, we want to get out of the sympathetic nervous system response with it, which is a stress response, and spend a little more time in a parasympathetic nervous system response. So getting out of stress, anxiety, and anger, being able to reframe a stressful or a situation we would have perceived to be stressful. Can we see it differently? Can we get out of anxiety just by seeing things differently, but also doing things differently? Can we release anger so that we're in a more of a parasympathetic state? Meaning, when you're in a parasympathetic state, you feel more peace, more calm, and more reassurance when you need to. I mean, there are situations where you want to be a little more hyped up. So how do we get into that state, and what are the things that make it difficult? We have more anxiety when we drink coffee. So spending more time in the parasympathetic nervous system state would mean decreasing caffeine. Drinking, I think you had 2 yesterday though, and 2 the day before. So so you've decreased. All right. I'll ask tomorrow. I'm going to ask tomorrow evening. So yes, decreasing caffeine. So there's a relationship between caffeine and anxiety, or caffeine and a sympathetic nervous system type of response. So if you are a coffee drinker and you have anxiety, then you might consider decreasing or even eliminating caffeine. Yeah, the jitters. So even eliminating caffeine. And then when it comes to alcohol and stimulants, decreasing alcohol, decreasing stimulants. Yes, go ahead. No, just drinks that are caffeinated. I mean, a hot drink at night might make you have to wake up to go to the bathroom, depending on what time you're drinking it. If you're having the hot drink, it'd be better to have it like before 7. But if it's an herbal tea or a non-caffeinated, then that would be fine. Yeah, I'm not a big, I don't really encourage hot chocolate that much. It's also sweet, and it has caffeine as well. Yeah. Mint tea. There are different teas, actually. It's interesting when it comes to herbal teas, not to go too far off subject, but different herbal teas, because they are herbs that can affect us in different ways. Different herbal teas are better to drink at different times during the day. So later in the day, as you're winding down, something like chamomile would be great, nice and relaxing for the nervous system. Lavender, also lovely later in the afternoon or the evening, a sip of lavender tea or lavender peppermint. Earlier in the day, maybe lemon earlier in the day, but don't start your day off with chamomile tea unless you're someone who maybe has anxiety or you have a really stressful situation and you want to calm yourself down. Passion flower, herbal tea, excellent, which we're going to talk about later in the day. So the citrus teas, have them earlier in the day, and then after you finish eating, great time for some ginger tea, because that's going to help with digestion. And then peppermint tea, great for digestion or gas. So if you're someone who bloats a lot after eating, you'd eat and then have peppermint tea then. So it's not all herbal teas are like as useful at any time during the day. So the interesting thing about green tea is also caffeinated. So yes, lot of caffeine in green tea, but you might use green tea as a stepping stone, a bridge, as you're coming off of coffee. So substituting the coffee with the green tea, and it might even be matcha green tea, because there are a lot of antioxidants in matcha green tea, so at least they're getting the health benefits. And then from matcha green tea, substituting for an herbal tea, and before you know it, you're caffeine free. Yes?
Okay, so green tea has L-theanine, and
Yeah.
L-theanine helps you sleep.
Well, it calms the nervous system. Yes. It has theobromine in it as well. So tea tends to make people feel calmer than coffee, but it does have caffeine in it. So it could have even more caffeine than coffee. But there's something else that counters it, so you don't have as much of a stress response with tea. Yeah. Right. And then that could be like your stepping stones on your way away from caffeine fully. So reducing stress, we've already talked about. Yes, go ahead, Henry.
How about milk?
For anxiety or just
Warm,
in general?
warm milk to get to sleep?
Oh, interesting. I don't know if it's the casein in milk, but I mean, I haven't done studies on warm milk, but people tend to say they have warm milk, it helps them to fall asleep. But I'm not sure why. It definitely has casein as a protein in it, but I don't know why that causes sleepiness. Yeah. But anything could also, something else could help your stomach feel full. Maybe I'll do a little bit of research on what is it in milk in particular that helps people sleep.
Answer tomorrow night?
Answer tomorrow night. Wait, I need a pen. Since I'm holding Randy accountable for decreasing anxiety, coffee, so you're going to hold me accountable. Milk research. Answer tomorrow night. Sorry, the final thing there was cognitive behavioral therapy. Very effective for reducing anxiety, especially for generalized anxiety disorder, but it would have to be for a certain number of sessions. So studies have found at least 20 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy. What else can help with anxiety? This was a study that was done on particular type of meditation for improving generalized anxiety disorder scores. 10 sessions over the course of 8 weeks using stress reduction tools, including breathing as part of the meditation and cognitive behavioral therapy as well. So I did say that I was going to look up this study. So I did what I said I was going to do. balneotherapy for anxiety. So balneotherapy is a type of hydrotherapy where you're adding an element to the water. So it could be something like magnesiums, like Epsom salts. It could be something like a peat bath. Those are both types of balneotherapy. And in this study, they compared balneotherapy to paroxetine, which is Paxil, which is an SSRI that is sometimes given for anxiety. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or serotonin selective reuptake inhibitor. And they're comparing the efficacy and the safety in a randomized multi-center study, and the study lasted for 8 weeks. So what happened when they compared this type of hydrotherapy with this type of SSRI or pharmaceutical that's often given for anxiety? And this is what they found in a study comparing balneotherapy with paroxetine for generalized anxiety disorder, and this is the AI summary, which I copied and pasted. Balneotherapy demonstrated significantly greater efficacy and was found to be more well tolerated. Specifically, balneotherapy led to a higher remission rate, 19% versus 7%, and sustained response rate, so that's over time, 51% versus 28% compared to paroxetine. Balneotherapy also had a lower incidence of adverse events. And I actually did find the actual study itself, which was from the Complementary Therapy Medicine Journal. It was an RCT, which is a randomized control trial. And the name of the study was Balneotherapy versus Paroxetine in the Treatment of Generalized Anxiety Disorder. So that's an amazing result. The effects of hydrotherapy on anxiety. So everyone might not want to do balneotherapy every night for 8 weeks, but you could. Maybe you could just try Epsom salt baths in the evening, a warm bath for 8 weeks in a row to help with anxiety. I had mentioned cold showers, cold water, and this was particularly for depression. So the balneotherapy study was for anxiety, and this is a study that was quoted in Psychology Today for depression. Cold water for depression, adapted cold shower, so that means you're going from warm and you're making it colder, 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 as a potential treatment for depression, doing it 1 to 2 times per day for weeks or even for months. And if you find, and so this was what I had mentioned about lavender, but if you find having an adapted cold shower every day too difficult, an introduction to hydrotherapy and cold water therapy would be finishing your hot shower with a blast of very, very cold water. And that's something you could do every day. And then you could do it back and forth. So once you're comfortable with that, you have the hot water, and with a blast of cold water, you can start doing it in cycles. Hot water and with cold water, back to hot water, a blast of cold water, back to hot water, a blast of cold water. So if you were doing it like that, the hot water would be about 15 minutes, the blast of cold water, 30 seconds, then you do it again, 15 minutes hot, 30 seconds cold, 15 minutes hot, 30 seconds cold. When I was at the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine, we had a very large hydrotherapy suite, and with all of my weight loss patients, and that's something we learned in our hydrotherapy class, 15 minutes hot, 30 seconds cold, 3 rounds. And I would do that with all of my patients. And everybody in the clinic at the time knew when they were going in the cold shower, screaming down the hallway. Screams of delight, you could say. So the whole thing took about an hour. Yes, go ahead, Terrence. Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. Ooh, praise the Lord. All right. We're raising the roof. What's that?
Like, Sue and I do that as well.
Mm-hmm.
For a while, but like realize I was doing it for anxiety. But it
Mhm.
could up the ailment.
Yeah. Also boosting your immune system, detoxification. But the contrast hot and cold has been studied in particular for mood, anxiety, depression, etc. And when you did it, so you were doing like 45 seconds hot, 60 seconds cold. 45 seconds hot, 60 seconds cold. Right, great, because that reminds me of exactly. So the basic principle with hydrotherapy, with hot and cold therapy, is that you always end with cold.
When I,
So you ended with cold.
when I turn the cold on, I
Yes.
step out of the shower.
You end with cold. That's a different type of end with cold. You end with cold and you're in the shower and then you turn it off. Yes.
It's out. It's out before.
Right. Yeah, that's great that you had a more positive day after doing that. So I mentioned lavender. You're using the lavender right now, which is amazing. This is a type of aromatherapy, a lavender oil. Lavender is a natural anxiolytic. I have used lavender with patients where they're taking it internally, so lavender capsules. That's only been with like severe anxiety, but with a lot of patients just using the lavender essential oil on their, temples, hands, etc. And then to help with sleep, like for those patients, they carry the lavender oil with them and they're using it throughout the day, maybe putting it on a bracelet, maybe just smelling lavender throughout the day, maybe getting lavender in a roller, like a little roller canister so you can put it on, like perfume almost. But if you're using it in a diffuser, and if it's particularly for sleep, the way that you've been using it, you could start the lavender 30 minutes before bed and then keep it going. And so you're breathing in lavender. It's calming the mind. But you can also use lavender if you have pain because it's a natural antispasmodic. So rubbing lavender maybe on your back or shoulder or wherever you have tense muscles. You could put it in the bath before bedtime. It's a nice sleep right there. And then walk in the room where the diffuser is going. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, just make sure you're not allergic to lavender.
Yes.
I had a massage once, and she used a lavender lotion.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I got home,
It wasn't
I was
relaxing.
as red as you can imagine. I was just burning and red. So.
So you have a lavender allergy.
Yes, that's how I found out.
Wow. Yes.
Anyway, not too many people have that, I guess.
Right. Not an anti-anxiety treatment for you at all. So make sure that you're not allergic to lavender. I think some dogs might, I don't know, with essential oils, you kind of have to be careful with your pets. So something to look into if you're diffusing essential oils in your house and you have dogs as well. What can help with depression? Low B12, low B6 have been independently correlated with lower mini mental exams, meaning lower cognitive function, and worse depression symptoms, B12 and B6. Low iron and low B6 have been found in groups with panic attacks. So maybe some of your mood or what you're experiencing could have to do with a deficiency of B12 or B6 or iron, or possibly even a thyroid issue. And this was a study that was done on major depression or any depressive order. They were given a placebo and then they were given a combination of B vitamins called Max Stress B. And they found that with the group that was given the Max Stress B, it showed significant and continuous improvements in depressive and anxiety symptoms compared to the placebo, just from this B vitamin. So it's not always just your mood and what you're experiencing. Sometimes there's actually a physiological reason as to why we're experiencing what we're experiencing. What I've found with patients with fatigue and low mood, usually I'll say, okay, let's look at your labs for iron, for vitamin D. Let's check your TSH and for B12, and let's see if any of these are low. And then often it's low vitamin D, low iron. Oh, okay, no wonder you're tired and you have low mood. Okay, let's start supplementing iron. Let's start supplementing vitamin D or B12. And then you're going to recheck your labs and tell me how you're feeling. And I've found when vitamin D is deficient, patients feel pretty low. They don't have a lot of energy. And then supplementing vitamin D, at some point it's like, oh, I have a lot of energy. But don't take it at night, because then it can impede sleep, and then you're onto another challenge totally. So vitamin D in the morning, yes.
Well, I'm a living example of vitamin B.
Okay.
When I was about 30 years old, I had all kinds of muscle problems, fatigue, and everything else. The doctors here worked on me for about 2 years, couldn't solve a thing. Karen said, let's go see Dr. Farnsworth, a naturopathic doctor in Kamloops.
Woo woo for naturopathic doctors.
And
yes.
at that time, I was skeptical. But I was at the end of the rope. We went over there. He took my life's history. He came back in about 15 minutes. He said, you are lacking vitamin B and vitamin E.
Vitamin B and
E.
And E.
You're right.
Okay.
I said, you're telling me these doctors worked on me for 2 years and couldn't tell me that? He said they weren't looking for it.
Right.
He gave me a real powerful vitamin B complex
Yes.
and vitamin E. He said, you come back and see me in 6 weeks, and I will guarantee you will be a different man. And he was right.
Wow.
And I have taken vitamin B for the rest of my life.
Wow. All right. There you go. You just proved the study that was on vitamin B complex and depression and anxiety. That's so encouraging. Because then you see it's not just, theory. Right?
No, I take it every day.
Every day.
Every day.
And you're 91 and doing amazing. Yep. Go ahead, Henry.
How about sea salt?
Taking it regularly, you mean?
Yeah.
I'm cautious, especially since a lot of people have issues with high blood pressure. So I don't recommend putting salt on your food. I only recommend it if someone has a hydration issue, and then it's like, okay, take just a tiny rock of sea salt, maybe Himalayan, pink salt, or Celtic, drop it in your water, just like a tiny bit, and drink that to help you to hydrate. But aside from that, I don't really recommend it.
I just read that sea salt does not raise your blood pressure. Are they wrong?
Okay. More research for me, because I've never heard that. Tomorrow night. Okay. So just quickly to go through a few different herbs that can help with depression or anxiety. St. John's wort in studies has been very effective for depression. You just have to be careful because St. John's wort can be contraindicated with pharmaceuticals and even with grape juice. So you'd want to see a practitioner so the practitioner can prescribe the amount of St. John's wort and make sure it's not actually going to clash with anything you're taking. Saffron, we talked about it already, saffron versus fluoxetine, and fluoxetine is actually the name for Prozac. So they've done studies where they're comparing saffron to Prozac. As we talked about on Monday night, saffron, very expensive, but you would get the dried saffron. I have recommended saffron actually for a combination of blood pressure plus mood together. And I recommended it in a tea form. So they were sipping the saffron tea to lower blood pressure and also to elevate mood. So that was a good 2-in-1 kind of thing. If your blood pressure is already low, this probably is not the option for you because it may lower your blood pressure more. Lavender, as I said, this was a study that was done on lavender versus citalopram, which is also an SSRI that's often given for depression or anxiety. In the study, they were given 5 grams of lavender. So I mentioned that I've used lavender before for patients with anxiety where they're actually swallowing a capsule. And they found that lavender was more statistically significant, had a more statistically significant impact on depression than the SSRI, and no increased side effects. Passion flower for anxiety and insomnia. As I said, passion flower often in a tea. A lot of people get sleepy. So unless you have high anxiety, then it would just bring you down to kind of a more calm state. You'd want to take it later in the day, outside of, a time where you're going to drive or operate equipment, and then it can help you get into a more calm state before bed. Vitamin D, as I'd already mentioned, I just put this here as a little note to myself, that studies have found that in studies on depression, that when they're doing the studies on depression, often they find a vitamin D deficiency. I could actually be a study person for this because I found that I was having some cognitive issues, just memory, low mood, fatigue. Went to see my doctor, and she tested my vitamin D and my iron. And this was before I became a naturopathic doctor, maybe year 1. Iron was low, and vitamin D was extremely, extremely deficient, and B12 was extremely deficient. And I was like, that's it? Like, you're not going to say, I'm expecting some big thing? And she was just like, start taking vitamin D and take B12, and she told me to eat some eggs. But I didn't eat the eggs, but I went with the vitamin D and B12, and it's amazing how different your experience can be. So vitamin D for lower mood can be effective, not necessarily anxiety. So we're ending up at just a few minutes after 8, helping to remember these ideas. Number 1, better sleep can have a big impact on our mood, possibly depression and anxiety. Reducing stress can also have a big impact on our mental health, including exercise, as I talked about on Monday, increases resilience and can also have a strong positive impact on our mental health. Education, just doing some research and finding out, even finding out about vitamins and herbs can have an influence. And then reflecting on circumstances and events in our lives and seeing, can I see it in a different way? Can I have a different perspective? Am I able to reframe? Even reflecting on things that are happening in our lives right now. Is it possible for me to see what's happening in my life right now in a different way than I've been seeing it so far? And finally, resilience practices, like some of the things that we've talked about, positive optimism, reflection as well, and having a different outlook when it comes to predicaments. Somehow this is going to work out. Positive outcome. And that's it for tonight's presentation. That is the fin, as you can say. And I think we've had questions so far. But if there are any final questions or comments, then now's the time. Does anyone have any final questions or comments? Yes, go ahead.